Hello, everyone. It's great to connect with you once again. Um, I'd like to crave your indulgence because I wouldn't be enabling my video today. Okay. I'm hoping that by the next session, okay, you'll be able to see my face. Okay, for those who would like to. So I'm grateful for those who sent in their comments and asked questions. Thank you so much for helping me know that the session was of great benefit to you. I really appreciate the feedback. And for those who asked questions, I appreciate that as well. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for the comment. And thank you generally for the feedback. I do appreciate. Okay. So last week, the focus of the session, okay, was on doing an overview, okay, just for us to understand the objectives of the two syllabi, okay, and then to understand um, what the two syllabi assess, okay, as well as how readers can distinguish among the different varieties of the IGCSE English examination. Okay, now I did promise that after last week, we would begin to delve into specific concept, okay, that students would come across in the first language English IGCSE. Okay, and I did say that this week we would focus on comprehension reading. Okay, so let me share my screen with you. Um, I'm sharing my screen with you, okay, because I intend to achieve two things today. Okay, today we would talk about comprehension reading, okay? And I would teach comprehension reading within the context of the first language IGCSE English. Now, I need you to recall that I did say that the 0500 and the 0990 are the same, okay? The difference is just in the code, okay? And also the difference is in the grade, okay? However, they are the same. Content-wise, they are the same, okay? But in terms of grades allotted, they are different. The grades are equivalent, okay, of one another, okay? However, in the 0500, you talk about your A star and A, B, C, and all that. However, in the 0990, okay, you talk about a grade 9, a grade 8, grade 7, 6, which are all equivalent, okay, of the grades in the 0500. Okay, so today I'll focus on two things. I'll share this PowerPoint with you. I'll engage the PowerPoint. I'll speak to the PowerPoint, okay, and I'll equally go into the practical session, okay, during which I share an actual past paper with you. Okay, so you could see how what you learn, okay, in the PowerPoint to see how, they apply to the IGCSE. At some point, I might oscillate between my PowerPoint and the IGCSE past paper. Okay, so let's delve right into it. I always tell candidates, okay, that the first language IGCSE English syllabus is not a difficult one, okay, because the focus is to help students develop communication skills in writing, in speaking, in listening, and all of that. Okay, and the focus, is also on helping students to develop, a penchant for information, for pieces of information. Now, if the purpose of a thing isn't known, abuse is inevitable. Okay, and that's why I seem to be emphasizing on the objectives, okay, of these two syllabi. Today, the focus is on comprehension reading. Now, for those conversant with the two syllabi, you would know that in paper one, the very first set of questions, okay, that students would come across are comprehension reading questions. And it's important for candidates to understand the type of questions, okay, that make up this section of the booklet. And that's why I have titled this presentation IGCSE English Language Comprehension Reading Question Types. Often I tell candidates I prepare for the examination that the comprehension section of the booklet, okay, is the easiest section in the booklet. And I always tell them that because as far as I'm concerned, I believe that that section of the booklet, okay, is worth 15 marks, which is a fact, okay, but I believe that that section is one of the few sections in the booklet that seem to offer them, such quantum of marks free of charge. Okay, and how can the comprehension section of the booklet, how can it become a bonus mark section for your student? Okay, and I believe that the best way, okay, to achieve that is to help students to understand the different types of questions within that section. Okay, personally, I believe that the comprehension reading section of the IGCSE first language, English booklet, okay, comprises of different question types. And those are the question types that I'll be talking about today. There are about 4 question types that I've been able to identify. And then as I treat each of them, I would go into, practical instances so that participants on this platform can identify, in practical terms, these types of what of questions. Okay, so let's just delve into it. So the focus is on the different types of questions, okay, that you can come across, okay, within the first section, okay, of the booklet, which is a comprehension section. Now, there are 4 types as far as I'm concerned, so you could ignore the summary part. There are 4 types of comprehension reading questions, okay, that you as a candidate or a teacher preparing student for the exam, okay, there are 4 questions that you would come across within the comprehension reading segment of the booklet. And the first is you will come across information obtaining questions. Okay, so within that booklet, within the first section of the booklet, the section that tests comprehension reading, okay, we have information obtaining questions. We equally have information understanding questions. We have implicit questions, and then we finally, okay, have explicit questions. Now, I'm going to consider all 4 question types within the context of the IGCSE, and then I will then, practically share a past paper with us. Okay, luckily, it's the most recent IGCSE first language question paper, which is the May-June 2023 paper. Okay, and I would use that past paper, to practically show us the different question types that, that I must have explained in the course of the presentation. So let's consider the very first one. I tell candidates, okay, that when you open the booklet and you begin to answer comprehension questions, okay, within the, within the plethora of questions, okay, you would find questions that fall under the category of information obtaining questions. Now we know that obtain as a verb, to obtain as a verb means to get, to collect, to extract, to retrieve, okay? So information obtaining questions are questions that demand that the reader collect a piece or pieces of information. Okay, now the pieces of information are found in the given text or passage. Okay, so information obtaining questions are questions that do not essentially stress you. Okay, they are simply questions that demand that you get information from the given text and you present it. Now, how do you answer information obtaining questions? You simply answer such question by scanning. Okay, I oftentimes advise candidates that the first thing to do, okay, when you get your first language IGCSE English booklet, okay, do not read the text. Okay, read the questions first. So go through all the comprehension questions. Now, you might think that by going through the comprehension questions, you have wasted time. Okay, but I don't believe so, because even without reading the comprehension text first, okay, by merely going through the the questions, okay, you would have an idea of what the text is about. Okay, so I oftentimes advise candidates to go through the comprehension questions first of all, okay, before reading the text. And it's also important for candidates to learn to read a text twice. The first reading is skimming, okay, which is the candidate reading it through quickly. So the candidate raffles through quickly, okay, so they could get the gist of the text, know, the main idea, what the text is about. Now, by the second reading, the candidate is then ready to answer the comprehension questions. And the second reading, okay, occurs as the candidate scans the text for specific pieces of information. So information obtaining questions are questions that essentially demand that you scan, okay, a given text, okay, you scan the passage and you collect, information that is requested. Okay, and I tell candidates that how do you identify information obtaining questions? Information obtaining questions employs such verbs as give, mention, state, list, and so on and so forth. Okay, so when a question says, give one reason why the dog was restrained, blah, blah, blah. Now, that is an information obtaining question. Okay, because it doesn't insist on you explaining. It simply says give. So give means mention, present, okay, write, list, okay, tell. Okay, so you don't have to express, the required information in your own words. You are free to copy the piece of information from the text and paste it in your booklet, meaning you're allowed to rely on the words of the text. So you can actually write out the information as it appears in the text. Okay, so information obtaining questions are, are explicit questions, questions whose, answers are clearly stated. You don't have to do any sort of deduction. The answers are clearly stated. The answers are so obvious in the text, okay? The only responsibility you have is to scan the text, okay, for the information you require, and then to just write it, to present it in your booklet. Mind you, you are free to utilize the words of the passage, meaning you are free to write out, the piece or pieces of information the way they appear in the text. Okay. Now, the next type of question, okay, um, is information understanding question. Okay, so when a candidate opens the booklet, okay, and the candidate is working on the comprehension reading section, okay, apart from information obtaining questions that are explicit, okay, and which demand, that you just scan the text and, collect the piece or pieces of information you want, and which you could also even present in the words of the passage, I mean, as they appear within the text, okay? We also have information understanding questions. Now, within the context of the first language IGCSE, okay, an information understanding or an information comprehension question, okay, is a question that tests, okay, a question which evaluates to what extent you understand a piece of information expressed in the text. Now, for this, you need two things. You must be able to scan the passage in order to identify the piece of information required, okay? But beyond scanning, you must be able to demonstrate that you understand the information. And one of the ways to evaluate to what extent, okay, the information is understood is by asking the candidate to express, the piece of information in their own words. So let me give an example. Let's say you go to the cinema, okay, and then when you went to the cinema, you saw this great movie, and at the end, as soon as you stepped out of the cinema room, okay, you met your best friend, and then your best friend is like, "Oh, please tell me what the movie is about." Now, if you understand the movie, you're likely to tell your best friend what the movie is about. So you're likely to say something like, "Oh, the movie is about love," or you're likely to say the movie is about vengeance. Okay. Now, by telling your friend that the movie is about vengeance, you have simply summed up the main idea of the movie. Okay. But if you did not understand the movie, what you're likely to do is to begin to jumble ideas, to model ideas up, and then to say things like, okay, so this character went somewhere and they met someone and then did something. Now, these are details, okay, but that's not exactly what your friend wants, okay? Your friend simply wants something like the main idea. What's the gist of the movie? So tell me what the movie is about. Simply put, the movie is about vengeance, okay? If your friend then needs details, okay, your friend could then ask for further details, and then you could then begin to and then you could then move away from the main idea, okay, to then giving details about character, details about action, details about dialogue, and all of that. Okay, so within the context of the IGCSE first um, language, okay, we equally have questions that test to what extent you understand the pieces of information, okay, provided in the text. Okay, and one of the ways, okay, that the question, okay, insists on checking whether or not you understand information is by insisting on you doing that in your own words. Okay, so there's always a clause such as in your own words, explain why the dog was restrained. Okay, so you see that you are to explain, okay, you are to exemplify, all right, you are to sometimes it might evolve some sort of simplification, okay, however, you're meant to do it within a context. And what's the context? In your own words. That's the clause, okay, and you must ensure that it is done in your own words, okay, without relying on the vocabulary of the text. And that is the way to check whether or not you understand the piece of information. So if you could do that in your own words, okay, and your language or vocabulary, okay, does not alter, okay, the primary the primary meaning of the word, okay, then you have succeeded, okay, in demonstrating that you understand, okay, the piece or pieces of information, okay, that you are asked to explain. Okay, so that's that um, for that category of questions. Okay, now we then have explicit questions. I tell candidates that explicit questions are more or less information obtaining questions. Okay, because the focus, okay, is on you collecting obvious pieces of information and presenting it. So explicit questions are also information obtaining questions. And if you say something is explicit, then it means it's clearly stated. It's there on the surface. You don't have to stress yourself. You don't have to do any sort of deductions and make inferences and all of that. Okay, so if someone tells you that, oh, this movie is sexually explicit, the person is simply saying that everything you need to know, okay, about sex is clearly stated there. Action and all that. That from probably the very first scene or whatever, you see very elaborate, okay, you see elaborate display, okay, of sexual relationships and all that. Okay. So basically the same applies to questions. Okay. Explicit questions are questions whose um focus, okay, the focus is clear. Now, if the focus is clear, okay, then the answers are also clearly stated within the text. Okay, so it's your responsibility to scan, and that's the reading skill you require, okay, for explicit questions. Okay, you must be able to scan the text, okay, for the piece or pieces of information that you require. Okay, and just like information obtaining questions, they equally utilize verbs, give, mention, state, list. Okay, and they also utilize WH relative pronouns, who, what, where, and when. Okay, so who traveled to the Bahamas according to the text? Who? That's the information you are required to obtain is obvious, meaning an identity of a character. Okay, so if you are there and then you're going for why somebody traveled to the Bahamas, that would be wrong because who implies identity. Okay, so you simply have to scan the text, haven't read it, you now have to scan it. Okay, so you could identify the paragraph in which such identity um, features, and then you then have to just spot it, okay, and then write it out in your booklet. Okay, now the last type of question, okay, are implicit questions. Now, you would also find implicit questions in the booklet. And what are implicit questions? Questions that force you to make deductions, questions that force you to make inferences. Okay, so sometimes there are questions that focus on effect. Okay, and questions that oftentimes focus on effect are questions that insist on the candidate making deductions. Okay, you have to think what is the effect of the writer's use of metaphor in the text. Okay, we all know what a metaphor is. Okay, so when a writer uses a metaphor, okay, what is the effect? Now, that is not an explicit question. Okay, it's an implicit question because it requires you to think beyond the surface, okay, to delve into the text, okay, and to dig out connotations and implications, okay, connotations of language use, implications of the use of, the use and choice of specific words. Okay, so implicit questions require you to dig beyond surface phrases, words, and sentences, and then think about the connotation of such words. Think about, the implications, okay, the semantic implications of such words or phrases, okay, being used in the text. All right, so I hope that you have learned, okay, and by now you can identify the four categories of question types, okay, which are found in the comprehension reading section of paper one of the first language, English IGCSE. Okay, so the very first are, information obtaining questions, okay, that require a candidate, okay, to simply scan the text, okay, and collect relevant information. Okay, and I did say that such piece or pieces of information can be expressed as they appear in the text. Okay, so you could plagiarize, all right? Secondly, I did mention information understanding questions, and I did say that there are questions that test to what extent, okay, a candidate understands a piece of information. And I did say that how that is evaluated is by insisting on the candidate using their own words. Okay, so if the candidate uses their own words and the information is still clearly stated, all right, then it shows that the candidate understands, okay, the piece or pieces of information required. And the third are explicit questions, which I did say are more or less information obtaining questions. And I did say that they use, such verbs as give, mention, list, state, and also use such WH relative pronouns as what, who, where, when, and the like, okay? And the last one, I did say they are implicit questions. And implicit questions are oftentimes questions that take candidates beyond, language to then meaning and effect. Okay, there are questions that demand the candidate, think about the connotative meaning of words and phrases, okay, and questions that demand that candidates, okay, think about the effect, okay, of of some words and phrases. So basically, there are questions that require candidates to think, okay, deductively, all right, in order to be able to, um, you know, present, okay, the most accurate response. Okay, so I think it's time, okay, for me to share the PowerPoint, share the question with you. Okay, um, I have I have some questions here, and I think it's time for me to share an actual paper with you. Okay, so you could see how, you know, how you could apply this question types, okay, to the IGCSE. So this is the major 2023 paper, and you know that I told you that now you have to pay attention here. Okay, so this is the variant. So this is variant one. When you see 12, that's variant two. When you see 13, that's variant three. Okay, and I did say the last time that the variant simply refer to the administrative zones, and the variant tells you the zone, I mean the region um, where you belong. Okay, and the variants come out of the different time zones that exist. Okay, and I think I've explained that. Okay, so let's just move on. It's always good, okay, and I think it's of great benefit for teachers, okay, to know the variant that their candidates, okay, that their students write. Okay, that could help you to keep a tab on questions that are often asked, okay, and you could become a bit predictive, okay. You could be able to predict. Now, I'm not saying that confidently, okay, but if you've been doing this for some time, you can predict, okay, some of the questions. I mean, especially the extended response and the directed writing part, some of the genres that could be assessed, okay, that could come out in the booklet. Okay, so let's just delve into it right away. Okay, so this is what the comprehension section, okay, of paper one. This is what it looks like. Okay, and in paper one you have to read three texts. And for the comprehension reading section, okay, the questions are always about what you read in text A. Okay, so here is text A. The questions are always about what candidates read in text A. Okay, so here, text A is about motivational speaker. Okay, and here's the reading booklet. This is text A, um, motivational speaker. Okay, so what is a motivational speaker? So that's the focus of text A. So the focus of text A is on motivational speaker. Okay, who a motivational speaker is. Okay, what makes a motivational speaker? All right, so now let's just go through the questions, and then I would differentiate, among these question types. Okay, so the first one is question 1A. Okay, what is an alternative name for a motivational speaker according to the text? Okay, so when you see what, okay, this already exposes the question type. Okay, and this shows that question 1A is an explicit question and equally an information obtaining question. So what is an alternative name for a motivational speaker according to text A? So this simply suggests that a candidate does not need to stress, over this. The candidate simply has to scan the text, okay, because this is an explicit question. Okay, it's a question that demands that a candidate collect information. So what is an alternative name for a motivational speaker according to the text? Meanwhile, I would like you to, to realize that the first language IGCSE comprehension reading questions actually follow the progression of ideas in the text. Okay, so I have observed that the question follow how each paragraph develops. and then how the ideas within the given text, how the ideas develop. So you aren't likely to find the answer, okay, to question 1A in the last paragraph of the text. It's so impossible. The answer to question 1A is likely to be found, within the first and second paragraph of the text. So that's why I said that the questions follow how ideas, okay, within the text develop. Okay, so what is an alternative name for a motivational speaker according to the text? This is obviously an information obtaining question, and it is equally an explicit question because it simply says what. So the implication is that I am permitted to, scan the passage and then to copy, okay, the piece of information I need just as they appear in the text. I might not need to change. I even would advise that don't change the words, okay? Just copy and paste, okay? Just write the piece of information out as it appears exactly in the text, okay? So if we check text A, what is a motivational speaker? Now, this is the first paragraph, okay? And it's important for you as an educator to help your students understand that this information here, okay, is just the blob, okay? This is not the first paragraph because obviously it says this text is one person's explanation of what being a motivational speaker involves, okay? So this is just some sort of information about what the text, okay, focuses on, okay? So candidates must know that and must not mistake the blob here for the first paragraph, okay? So if we read the first paragraph, we would realize, the answer to the question. So the question says, what is an alternative name for a motivational speaker according to the text? What? So that's purely an explicit question. So paragraph 1 says, a motivational speaker, also known as an inspirational speaker, is someone who delivers speeches with the intention of motivating or inspiring the people in the audience. Typically, a motivational speaker has a reputation as an expert on the subject being discussed and will encourage the audience to look at things from a different perspective. Okay, so the question is, what is an alternative name for a motivational speaker according to the text? The alternative name is obvious here, pretty obvious. So we all know that the alternative name here is an inspirational speaker. Everybody knows that. Okay, so that's the alternative name. Everybody knows that the alternative name here is what? An inspirational speaker. That's your alternative name. An inspirational speaker. So the inspirational speaker is right here. Okay, an inspirational speaker right here. Okay, right here, an inspirational speaker. Okay, so, and the question is what? Just the mark. Okay, so it means that just write an inspirational speaker here. Okay, an inspirational speaker here, and then you have your 1 mark. Okay, an inspirational speaker. Okay, and then the candidate has, okay, their 1 mark. Ellipses. Okay, an inspirational speaker, and then you have your 1 mark. Okay, now there are times that the question here would demand 2 pieces of information. Okay, it could say mention the 2 alternative names. Mention 2 alternative names for a motivational speaker. And in the paragraph, you could have an inspirational speaker, or you could have maybe a life coach or something. Okay. All right. So if you could think of that, okay? Now, and it's still always 1 mark, okay? The first question of the IGCSE booklet is always 1 mark. I mean, the comprehension section, the first question, okay, within the series of comprehension questions within the paper 1, okay, the first question is always 1 mark. Like you see here, it's always a mark. But there are times that the question demands you to provide 2 answers. Now, we must help our students to realize that to have 1 mark here, they need 2 correct answers when the question says so. So it means that if a candidate is able to give 1 correct answer and then the other one is wrong, one correct answer and one incorrect answer, the candidate loses the 1 mark, okay, because it takes two correct answers. I mean, when the question, okay, says so, for you to have, 1 mark here, okay. Now, question 1B, okay, says, using your own words, explain what the text means by reputation as an expert, line 3. Now, this question, I mean, 1B, I, and 1B, 2. These two sub-questions, okay, come under the information understanding questions category, okay, because here there's a clause, you must use your own words. Failure to do so, you would lose 2 marks. Okay, now using your own words, okay, the objective here is to test to what extent you understand, this piece of information, this phrase. So you have to explain. Now, I tell candidates that don't waste your time explaining, okay? The examiner is not really interested, okay, in your explanation. Rather, in order to save time, okay, what a candidate must do is that the candidate must simply think of synonyms, okay? Now, in this case, we have 4 words. We all know that as and an are grammatical words. They are not lexical words, okay? So a candidate might not really need to pay attention to them. The candidate simply has to pay attention to these ones, reputation and expert, okay, because these are the lexical words here, okay? So I tell candidates that, okay, so the next thing is think of a synonym, okay, the most suitable for repetition, a word that conveys the same meaning as repetition. Okay, so reputation could suggest what someone is known for, what someone is famous for. An expert could suggest a specialist, a professional. So using your own words, explain what the text means by reputation as an expert. Now, it's important for the candidate to check line 3. 1, 2, 3. So line 3 is right here, reputation as an expert. So the candidate should read, from the beginning of the sentence. Typically, a motivational speaker has a reputation as an expert on the subject being discussed, meaning typically a motivational speaker, okay, is well known as a specialist. Okay, so now, so if I were to answer this, I would simply say, using your own words, explain what the text means by reputation as an expert. I'll just simply write well known as a specialist or well known as a professional, okay, or famously known as a specialist or a professional. Now, by that, I've been able to, to achieve explaining, the phrase using my own words. And it's important. Candidates must not miss any of the words. And by that, I mean, they mustn't utilize repetition or expert, okay? Rather, they must find words or phrases that communicate both meanings. So in this case, any explanation a candidate gives, okay, that takes out repetition, okay, and only expresses expert is not a complete response. That kind of response would not earn 2 marks. It will only earn 1 mark. To earn 2 marks, your explanation must take into account the 2 lexical words here, reputation and expert, because they are the 2 strands of meaning, okay, within the phrase. Okay, and then we have different perspectives. Okay, we have different perspective, different perspective, different perspective here. Okay, we also have, so here, all right. So here we also have different and perspective, different and perspective in line 4. Let's check line 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so typically a motivational speaker has a reputation as an expert, and we encourage the audience to look at things from a different perspective. from a different perspective. So we know here that for me to earn the 2 marks here, I need to think of a synonym that captures, okay, the meaning of different. And I also have to think of a synonym that captures perspective. So different could be another perspective, but I wouldn't use perspective. I have to change it. So another viewpoint, another angle, a fresh angle, a new angle. Okay. Do that, and then you have your 2 marks here. So that's why I said that this section right here, okay, so this section right here, okay, um, falls under information understanding questions. Okay, it means that question 1B here, okay, checks to what extent a candidate understands the piece or pieces of information provided in the form of these phrases here. Okay, and I did say, remember that the marks here, okay, suggest to what extent a candidate should go. And that's one thing I always tell candidates that I prepare for the IGCSE. Pay attention to the marks, okay? When you see 2 marks, it must, okay, point your attention to the necessity of having 2 strands. It means there are 2 strands of meaning that the examiner expects your response to capture. The moment your response does not capture those 2 strands, you cannot have the 2 marks. If your response captures only 1 strand, then you'd only have 1 mark. There are 2 strands here, reputation and expert. As and are grammatical words, so they don't matter semantically as much as reputation and expert. Different and perspective here are lexical words. Different is an adjective within the context. Perspective is a noun within this context, okay? So there are 2 strands of meaning here, and whatever you write here must take into account, must reflect those 2 strands, different and perspective, without using these words. You have to do that in your own words. Now, question 1C here says identify. Question 1C says identify, okay? And also it's worth 2 marks. When you see 2 marks, remember 2 strands, okay? 2 marks, at least you must have 2 points. So the question says reread paragraph 2, okay, and identify 2 ways. So it means the moment you're able to to list 2 ways, 2 correct answers, you have your 2 marks. Failure to do that, you lose the 2 marks. So identify 2 ways that a motivational speaker might have an emotional or mental effect on a person's life. Identify 2 ways, so 2 marks, okay? Now, this is equally an example of, information obtaining question, okay? And you may also call it explicit question because the answers are right there in paragraph 2. Paragraph 2, here's paragraph 2. Here's paragraph 2. Here's paragraph 2. Okay, so you have identify 2 ways a motivational speaker might have an emotional or mental effect on a person's life. You simply have to read paragraph 2 and then you scan out the 2 ways. And once you do that, you have your 2 marks. Okay, so here also is an information obtaining question. It's information obtaining question. It's an explicit question. So now this question shouldn't stress our students. Okay, the only category of student that this question might stress are students that don't know how to scan. Okay, and as educators, we should have, developed that skill in our students. Okay, the ability, okay, to scan. All right, so this is information obtaining question. It shouldn't stress our students. Okay, at this point, they should have learned to scan. Okay, so, and they simply have a responsibility to just read the paragraph, okay, and then identify, the 2 ways, 2 correct information, and they earn 2 marks here. So pay attention. I hope you're also seeing why, I keep insisting that the first language English IGCSE syllabus is not a difficult syllabus at all. You know why? For you to answer question 1C, a candidate simply has to read paragraph 2. And I keep telling candidates who ask you a question and tells you where to locate the answer. That sounds ridiculous. Okay. So when candidates, fail this question sometimes, I wonder what could have gone wrong. Okay, because you would hardly find this in major English exams. Okay, the answer to question 1C can never be found in any other paragraph than paragraph 2. So it's like 15 marks free of charge, okay, because you are told exactly what paragraph to read, okay, and you're told exactly where to derive, you know, a piece or pieces of information from. So why should it be difficult, okay, for a candidate to still come up with, an incorrect information or incorrect pieces of information? Okay, if your students still end up coming up with incorrect pieces of information, then possible that they have an issue with focus, attention. So one of the things we must do as educators, as language teachers, is that we must help our students. We must train them. They must learn to zoom in, okay, on information, shut out distractions, zoom in on information, and get specific, relevant piece or pieces of information. Okay, and let's then move on to the 1D. The 1D is the same as 1C. It's also explicit question. Who asks you a question and tells you where to locate the answer from. That's ridiculous. Okay, but that's exactly what we'll find in the first language English IGCSE paper. Okay, so you see, reread. What are you rereading? You're reading paragraphs 3 and paragraphs 4. Now, I tell candidates that the answer to this first question, okay, can only be found in paragraph 3. Now, that's the way IGCSE structures, their comprehension questions. And that's why I believe that those questions are, straightforward. And that's why they are explicit, identified. You simply have the question is obvious. The answer is right there in the text. Okay, so your responsibility is to read the paragraph 3. So identify two different types of online or live audience that motivational speakers might talk to according to the text. The two different types here can only be found in paragraph 3, oftentimes. Okay, now this is an explicit question and it is equally, an information obtaining question. Okay, just read paragraph 3 and write out what you think is your answer here. Okay, reread paragraphs 3 and 4. To answer, question D1, you have to read paragraph 3 because the answer to D1 can only be found in paragraph 3. Okay, and to answer D2, you read paragraph 4. Okay, now D1 is what? 2 marks. It means you need 2 correct answers. And oftentimes when the question insists on 2 marks, you can be sure that there are about 3 correct answers. Okay, so you simply have to identify 2 correct ones, and then you walk away with your 2 marks. Here, the question here is what 3 marks. Now, students make a mistake here, and the mistake is they don't pay attention to what the question is worth. Now, when you see 3 marks here, it suggests that the examiner expects you to provide 3 correct points. Okay, but what candidates do is that they lose sight of the 3 marks here and they only identify 1 point and elaborate on it. So they fill up this space. The space is here. And by the time you read what they have here, you have the impression that they have more than 1 point. But by the time you read it as an examiner, you realize that they simply have 1 point here, but they were able to flesh it out. And if you flesh out 1 point, it's still 1 point, and it can never fetch you 3 marks. Okay, so we must ensure that candidates understand that the marks they see, what each question is worth, should give them an idea of how much to write. So when they see 3 marks, that should point at, the examiner's expectation to see 3 correct points, not 1 point that is fleshed out beyond reason. Okay. And this also is an explicit question. Now you need to explain. So this shows that you require to understand the question and the pieces of information. However, there's no clause here that insists on you using your own words. So here you are equally allowed, okay, to copy and paste, meaning you're allowed to write out the different pieces of information relevant to this question as they appear in the text. So you could use the language of the text. Okay. And lastly, okay, to have your 15 marks, the last 3 marks here, like I did say, when you see 3 marks here, it also suggests 3 valid points. Okay, so you could have 4 points if you like. Okay, but the examiner only requires 3 valid points, okay, for you to earn 3 marks here. And here says using your own words. Now, using your own words here suggests that this question here, okay, is an information understanding question. So reread paragraph 5. So you see, okay, that for you to answer the question here, you don't have any business with paragraph 1. You don't have any business with paragraph 2, 3, or 4. Your business is with paragraph 5. And oftentimes, okay, if you find paragraph 5 as the last question here, that means that most likely the question only has about 5 paragraphs. So let's count. This is the first paragraph. This is the second. This is the third. This is the fourth. This is the fifth. Okay, so you see that there's no big deal to the first language English IGCSE. Okay, candidates, simply have to understand how, how the different sections work. Okay, and language teachers equally have to understand, they must understand, because it's what you know that you can, okay, teach your students. Okay, and that is why I always insist that no student should fail in the comprehension reading section. As far as I'm concerned, it should be bonus mark, 15 marks free of charge. So if you notice that your students aren't doing well in this section, then you might have to pay attention. Check them. Can they scan? Can they read the passage and scan for specific, details? Check that. Number 2, check whether your students are restless. Okay, now restless students might have a challenge with, with focus. So another thing you will have to do to help them is to force them. Okay, and by forcing them, I don't mean put your hands on their shoulder and then, pressing on them. That's not what I'm saying. Okay, by forcing them, I simply mean you have to give them activities that encourage them to shut out distraction while they zoom in on information until they're able to understand, okay, and identify, the details of the, you know, of the information, okay, they've been asked to identify. Okay, so let's just go over it again. So I did say at the beginning, okay, that the first language English IGCSE consists, comprehension section, consists of about 4 um, question types categories. Okay, and I did say that the first is information obtaining questions, and they are more or less explicit questions, and that these questions you can identify them by paying attention to the verbs give, identify, mention, state, list. When you see such verbs, then you know that such questions shouldn't stress you, okay, because they only require that you spot information from a given text and you present it in your work. I also did say that candidates are permitted to plagiarize for these questions. By that, I mean you can use the vocabulary of the text. You can write out the question in your booklet exactly as they appear in the text. Okay, and I did say that the second category, are um, information understanding questions. Okay, and I did say that there are questions that insist, okay, on you using your own words to explain, a piece of information. And I said that the reason for that is so the examiner could test, could evaluate to what extent you understand the information. And to check that, okay, you have to pay attention. You have to ensure that you pay attention, first of all, to the mark. Okay, how much is the question? Okay, you pay attention to the mark. It's 2 marks here. And that means that your response must convey the two strands of meaning, okay, expressed in the phrase. Okay, the two strands of meaning expressed in the phrase. Okay, and when, you know, your response conveys that, you have your 2 marks. And I also did say that the next question type, explicit question, and then you find that here. And I did say that explicit questions, okay, are the same as information obtaining questions, okay, because they simply require you to identify the pieces of relevant information and to write them out. And oftentimes, such questions don't come with the use your own words clause. Okay, so that also suggests that you're permitted to use the language of the text, meaning you're permitted to write out the pieces of information exactly as they appear in the text. And lastly, I emphasized on the importance, the necessity of paying attention to the marks allotted to each question. It's so important, okay? You must pay attention to how much each question is worth, okay? Because paying attention to how much each question is worth, okay, would help you to know how much to write. So when you see 2 marks, you must be aware that there are two strands of meaning, okay, that you must convey. And when you see 3 marks, you also must be aware that your response must convey at least 3 valid points. In addition, anytime you see the using your own words clause, you must know that it's more or less an information understanding question, okay, and sometimes also implicit questions, okay. So the goal is to check, okay, the extent to which you understand the pieces of information provided in the text, and you have a responsibility to demonstrate that you understand the pieces of information and to express. So when you say 3 marks, you should know that your response must express at least 3 relevant points. Okay. Lastly, I said who asks a question, okay, and still refers you to where to locate the answer from. Who does that? I think it's only Cambridge, okay, that does that. Okay, so that's why I feel that our students must be taught how to answer the comprehension segment. Imagine they read paragraph 5 and then explain why this expert does not consider that the speakers they have met are motivational. Okay, now it means for you to answer this question, okay, a candidate simply has to read only paragraph 5. So if you notice that your students do not perform impressively, okay, in this section, then it could be, okay, two of several things. It could be that your students have a challenge with scanning information, okay, which implies that your students have a challenge with focus, focusing, zooming in on a piece or pieces of information and getting the details required, okay? So how do you help them? Okay, come up with activities, reading activities, okay, that would encourage them, okay, to identify specific details. Now, not main ideas, okay? For them to identify main ideas, they simply have to, to skim a text, meaning to read through, okay? But come up with activities, that would encourage them, okay, to zoom in on text and get specific details. All right. Now, if your students do that often, okay, then sooner or later, your students would begin to have outstanding, marks, okay, in this section of the, of the first language English IGCSE. Okay, so I think we have come to the end of today's session, and you know, I think we have come to the end of today's session, and I'm so glad, okay, that you could join. All right, please feel free to attach your questions. Feel free to send in your comments. Let me know what you think. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask me. I'm going to address all of the questions. Thank you so much. Take care of yourself. Bye.